The night air carried the faint hum of crickets and the smell of rain. The road was nearly empty, just the dim glow of streetlights stretching across cracked asphalt. David Harris was driving home from his volunteer shift at the community center, his radio low, an old jazz tune weaving through the quiet. He felt tired but content, the kind of fatigue that comes from doing something good. Then came the flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. He sighed, easing his old sedan to the shoulder. It wasn't the first time he'd been pulled over, but something in the pit of his stomach warned him this would be different. The lights didn't just flash, they flared, angry and impatient. He turned off the engine, placed both hands on the steering wheel, and waited. Years in the army had taught him how to stay calm under pressure, but this was a different kind of battlefield. Sergeant Miller stepped out of his cruiser, boots crunching on wet gravel. He was broad-shouldered, his hand already resting on his holster as if the world itself were a threat waiting to move. He didn't see the car so much as the silhouette of its driver. The way he approached, slow, deliberate, suspicious, made it clear he wasn't looking for a conversation. License and registration, Miller barked before he was even fully beside the car. His tone wasn't just authoritative, it was sharp, clipped, a warning more than a request. David nodded slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Yes, officer, it's in my wallet, right here. Don't move until I say so," Miller snapped. His flashlight beamed through the window, sweeping across the dashboard, the passenger seat, the small hanging tag with the American flag emblem and the words U.S. Army Veteran. The light lingered there a moment before moving on, but the officer's expression didn't soften. David swallowed. "Sir, may I step out of the vehicle?" Miller interrupted. David blinked. Sir, did I do something wrong?" "I said step out." The voice cracked through the night like a whip. Something in David's chest tightened. His fingers trembled slightly, though he forced them to stay in sight. He opened the door slowly, the interior light spilling out onto the pavement. Miller took a step back, one hand on his gun, the other gripping the flashlight like a club. "Keep your hands where I can see them." "They're right here," David said softly, lifting them above his shoulders. His voice carried the calm of a man who'd been trained to diffuse chaos, but there was an edge of disbelief in it too. He had faced combat zones, stood under enemy fire, and yet standing here, under the trembling beam of a flashlight in his own neighborhood, felt far more dangerous. Miller circled around him like a predator gauging its prey. "You been drinking tonight?" "No, sir." "Where you headed?" "Home. Just finished helping out at the community center." The answer only seemed to irritate the officer further. "You live around here?" "Yes. A few blocks down." Miller squinted, as if that answer itself were suspicious. "This your car?" David hesitated, confused. "Yes. It's registered in my name. My license and registration are in the glove box if you'd like to see." "Don't reach for anything." Miller's voice was low now, dangerous. The hand on his gun twitched. David froze. The sound of his own heartbeat filled his ears, drowning out the hum of the engine from the patrol car. He could feel the tension thick in the air, the kind that builds right before something breaks. "Officer," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm not a threat. I served this country for 20 years. I just want to go home." For a brief second, Miller's eyes flickered toward the veteran emblem again, but whatever humanity might have surfaced was quickly swallowed by pride and fear. He didn't respond. Instead, he gestured sharply toward the trunk. "Pop it open." David hesitated, then reached carefully for the latch. The sudden movement made Miller jerk his gun free. "Hands up." The command hit like thunder. The gun was out now, pointed directly at him, cold and gleaming in the streetlight. David's breath caught in his throat. His hands went up higher, his palms trembling in the light. "Sir, please," he said, his voice cracking just slightly. "I'm not armed." From one of the nearby houses, a curtain shifted. A neighbor peered out, phone in hand. Another light flicked on down the street. The quiet night was unraveling. Miller's finger hovered dangerously near the trigger. "You think I'm stupid?" David met his eyes then, not with anger but with something steadier, disbelief, sorrow, maybe even pity. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I think you're scared." That sentence hung in the air longer than either man expected. For the first time, Miller's hand trembled slightly. The silence between them deepened until it was broken only by the sound of a distant car and the soft clicking of the camera on a neighbor's phone. In that frozen moment, two men, one holding fear, the other holding dignity, the night seemed to hold its breath. The drive from the airport to the city stretched under a pale gray sky that hinted at rain. Inside the car, the air was thick with unspoken tension. David sat in the passenger seat, hands still resting on his knees, the imprint of the gun that had been pointed at him burned into his thoughts. The hum of the engine was the only sound for a long while, until Captain Ruiz finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "You okay, Mr. Harris?" He nodded slowly, though the truth was heavier than the gesture. "I'm fine, Captain. Just tired." She gave him a side glance. Ruiz was known in the department for being fair but firm, a woman who'd spent years trying to change a system that resisted it. She'd arrived just in time that night, stepping into chaos with calm authority. Even then, she could still hear the sharp command in Miller's voice, see the tremor in his hand as he aimed his weapon at a man who hadn't done a single thing wrong. "He didn't even see you," she said quietly. "Didn't see your ID, didn't see your hands, didn't see the person sitting in front of him. Just saw what he wanted to." David looked out the window. The city lights were coming into view now, warm, indifferent, familiar. "That's the thing, Captain," he murmured. "I've spent most of my life serving this country, wearing the same flag on my shoulder he does. But out there, none of that mattered." She didn't respond right away. What could she say that wouldn't sound hollow? In her line of work, she'd seen good officers lose their way and bad ones hide behind their badges. Miller, she thought, had probably started once as a man trying to do good. But fear, prejudice, and power can twist even the simplest intentions. At the next light, Ruiz exhaled and turned toward him. "You know the department will open an investigation. The footage will be reviewed. Internal Affairs will handle the case." David gave a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "That camera saved my life more than your badge did." The words stung, though he hadn't meant them cruelly. They were simply true. He had seen too many headlines, too many names that never got the chance to explain themselves. Tonight, he had nearly become one. They drove in silence again. The rain began to fall softly, streaking the windshield with silver lines. Each drop seemed to echo in the small space between them. Ruiz finally pulled into a small diner's parking lot. "Coffee?" she asked. David hesitated, then nodded. They sat in a booth near the window, the smell of coffee and frying bacon surrounding them. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, poured them both steaming mugs without a word. Ruiz wrapped her hands around hers like she needed the warmth to stay grounded. "I've been trying to fix things from the inside for years," she said finally. "You make policies, run trainings, give speeches about bias and accountability, but then a night like this happens, and it feels like you're back at square one." David stirred his coffee slowly. "Change takes time. I've seen it, but it also takes courage." He looked at her then, his gaze steady. "You showed that tonight." Ruiz almost smiled. "So did you." He shook his head. "I just wanted to make it home." For a while, they just sat there, the rain tapping against the window like an old clock marking the seconds of silence. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware of the small storm that had passed between two strangers bound by one terrible moment. When they finally stood to leave, Ruiz pulled out her phone. "There's going to be press about this. They'll want statements. You don't have to talk if you don't want to." David adjusted his jacket. "I will," he said quietly. "People need to hear it. Not the anger, just the truth." She nodded, respect flickering across her face. "If you ever need anything, call me." He gave her a faint nod and stepped into the night. The rain had eased into a drizzle, and the air smelled clean, almost forgiving. He walked slowly toward his car, his reflection rippling in the wet pavement. Across the street, two teenagers were watching something on a phone. One of them looked up, eyes widening slightly when he recognized David from the video already making its rounds online. The kid raised a hand in a small, respectful wave. David paused, nodded once, and got into his car. He sat for a moment before starting the engine, letting the quiet fill him. Inside the diner, Ruiz watched him go, her coffee growing cold. She thought about Miller, How she'd have to face him tomorrow when she signed the papers placing him on suspension. She thought about the weight of that badge and the responsibility it carried, and how easily fear could turn it into a weapon. David drove off into the night, the city lights reflecting off his windshield. He didn't feel anger anymore, just a deep, tired hope that maybe, this time, the truth would be louder than the silence that usually followed. By the next morning, the city was already buzzing. The video had made its way from one phone to another, climbing social media feeds, spilling onto news broadcasts, and igniting debates that reached living rooms, coffee shops, and city halls. Every frame was dissected. The flashing lights, the trembling hands, the calm voice of the veteran, and the weapon drawn by a man wearing the very badge meant to protect. At the precinct, the mood was brittle. Officers avoided eye contact in the hallways. Conversations dropped to whispers when Captain Ruiz walked by. She had spent the night answering calls from the mayor's office, from reporters, from civil rights groups demanding accountability. Sleep had been a luxury she couldn't afford, and the weight of the badge on her chest felt heavier than it ever had. In the small conference room at the end of the corridor, Sergeant Miller sat with his hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. His uniform was immaculate, but his face was pale, jaw clenched tight. The internal affairs officer across from him spoke calmly, almost mechanically, reading out the department's decision. Words like excessive force, misconduct, and public trust filled the sterile air. Miller didn't argue, he just nodded. Slow, rigid, like someone watching his life unravel frame by frame. Captain Ruiz entered as the final statement was read. She stood across from him, her expression unreadable. "Sergeant Miller," she said, voice firm but not cruel, effective immediately, "you are relieved of duty. You are to surrender your badge and service weapon." He hesitated for a fraction of a second before unpinning the badge from his chest. The metal clinked softly as it landed on the table, a sound too small for how final it was. His weapon followed, placed down with the same care someone might give to a fragile memory. For a moment, he looked at Ruiz as if he wanted to say something, maybe to defend himself, maybe to apologize. But nothing came. He just rose, nodded once, and walked out. Outside the precinct, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed like lightning, microphones shoved forward with questions he didn't answer. "Sergeant, do you have any comment? Do you feel remorse? Were you aware the man you stopped was a decorated veteran?" He pushed through the crowd, the noise of the city crashing over him, every shout and flash a reminder of the badge-shaped hole now burning on his chest. Meanwhile, across town, David Harris sat in his small kitchen, staring at his cooling cup of coffee. The morning light filtered through the curtains, painting long golden lines across the table. The TV murmured softly in the background, his name, his face, the video, all over the news. He didn't like seeing it. He hadn't wanted to become a symbol, only to be treated fairly. His phone buzzed with calls from reporters, messages from strangers, and words of support from veterans he'd served with years ago. Some wanted him to speak out, to lead a movement. But David wasn't thinking about speeches. He was thinking about that night. About fear and restraint, about the strange stillness that comes when life narrows down to a single breath. When the knock came at his door, he expected it to be another journalist. Instead, it was Captain Ruiz. She looked exhausted but resolute. "Mr. Harris," she said softly, "I wanted to tell you in person, Miller's been terminated. Internal Affairs concluded the investigation this morning." David nodded. "I figured as much. There'll be a press conference this afternoon," she continued. "The department will issue a public apology. They'd like to offer you the chance to speak if you want to." He was silent for a long time. What good would it do? He asked finally. "Maybe not for him," she said, "but for everyone watching. For every person who's ever been afraid when they shouldn't have to be." David studied her face. The fatigue, the sincerity. Then he nodded. "All right, I'll come." That afternoon, the press conference drew a crowd outside City Hall. Cameras lined the steps. Ruiz stood to one side of the podium, the mayor to the other. When David stepped forward, the crowd quieted. He took a breath, his voice steady but low. "I didn't want to be on that video," he began. "I didn't want to be a headline or a cause. I just wanted to get home. But what happened to me wasn't new. It's happened to people whose names you'll never hear." He paused, eyes scanning the faces before him. "I served this country for most of my life. I know what it means to protect something bigger than yourself. That badge," he nodded toward Ruiz, "should mean the same thing. Not power. Responsibility." For a moment, there was silence, deep, collective. Then, quiet applause began and grew louder, rolling through the crowd like a wave. Ruiz lowered her head slightly, a mix of pride and grief in her chest. When it was over, David stepped away from the podium. He didn't look triumphant, just peaceful, as though the weight he'd carried for years had lightened, even if only a little. And somewhere, a man named Miller sat alone in a quiet apartment, the city's noise fading through the window, staring at the empty space where his badge once lay, and wondering, maybe for the first time, what it really meant to serve.